Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 424.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other CashFlow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because here's the thing. When it comes to building your cash flow, whether you are getting started today or you are already started and you're trying to grow and maybe you're trying to break the six-figure, seven-figure, eight-figure mark, you're doing things out there. One of the often, overlooked places that we can sometimes try to skip steps on is in the legal area. Now, while today's guest is by far an expert in the entertainment law field, what I want you to know is that we can learn a lot from him, whether we are practicing entertainment law, and we can definitely learn a lot from him because of the people that he has studied. Specifically in this case, I'm talking about John Wooden. You're like, what? What I mean is he was able to put together books and publications that help us become better coaches, better leaders. In fact, you could say that John Wooden was arguably the greatest coach and leader of all time. Therefore, if he's written a book called Woodenisms, it's probably something that we can learn a lot from. So we're definitely going to be able to do that today as we listen to Neville Johnson. Now, Neville Johnson is the founding partner of Johnson Johnson LLP. They're a prominent attorney and legal firm up in the Hollywood area. And if you've ever thought about, like, who do people go to when they're trying to, quote unquote, go after the big boys? Well, that's who we're talking to today. Now, not only that, he believes in being a well-rounded entrepreneur and, more importantly, person. So he also has some interesting hobbies that we're going to talk about as well. But here's the thing. Let's take some notes. Let's make sure that when we go to market, that we're thinking all the right things, but let's also see what we can learn about leadership, understand what we can do to become bigger, better entrepreneurs, and most importantly, have a little fun along the way. Help me welcome Neville Johnson. Neville, you there?
I am, and thank you, Jay.
I'm glad you're taking the time. Now, this being your first time here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. Because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. Chief among them, as an entrepreneur occasionally, I can envision myself as using our products and services, saving people and changing their lives in various different ways. But also, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So, my question to you is as follows. Before everything that we know you for today, kind of like, if you were thinking about Spider-Man, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, taking some photos, etc. And then one day he gets bit by a spider and becomes Spider-Man. So before you become the Neville Johnson that we know of today, but before the books, before the law firm, before everything, what we want to know is, who is Neville Johnson?
Well, was raised in Southern California. I went to a great Jesuit high school called Loyola, and had a fairly normal upbringing. I ended up graduating from UC Berkeley during the student revolution, you could call it, and always knew I was going to go to law school. I did. And here I am, many years later, still practicing law. And along the way, acquired a great wife, wrote some books, played a lot of music, and did my best to lead a well-rounded life.
Now, you said something that I think was interesting. You said you always knew you were going to practice law. How did you have such certainty?
Well, when I was a kid, my best friend's father was a very prominent lawyer. He ultimately became a judge, and I went to court with him a few times. And then my parents were very well educated, and you grow up in a family that, with the understanding that the legal profession is a great profession to be in. And then of course there were television shows at the time like Perry Mason and the Defenders, and I identified with those. And I suppose most fundamentally is I really like to argue.
Okay, how does that go well with the spouse?
Fine. I mean, I've learned, I've grown. I'm still learning and growing.
So if we were to say who wins more arguments, you or your wife, you would say
she does, because I just laid down the gun now.
I just wanted to make sure
it's not worth it.
I wanted to make sure that everything was like my experience too. I'm like, okay, now I understand. So this is good. This is good though. Now you've won a number of accolades, from being called the super lawyer, one of the top 100 lawyers by Hollywood Reporter, top 50 by Variety, the Daily Journal, etc. I'm just going to assume that there was a path to becoming recognized in that way, and you didn't just start there. So what was that journey like?
There's no substitute for hard work. And that's when I got to law school, I really, really applied myself. And since I became a lawyer, I have continued to keep up with my profession. That is what we sell, as advice. And you want to always be on top of surfing the wave of knowing what's going on. So maybe I'll just jump into Wooden right now. I mean, Coach Wooden, who, of course, is the greatest coach in the history of probably any sport, created this thing called the Pyramid of Success. And he says the key ingredients, well, first of all, he says success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you've made the effort to be your best. And he says the key ingredients at the bottom of the pyramid, as the cornerstones, are enthusiasm and hard work. And at the top is going for a great and difficult challenge, which he calls competitive greatness. So I would say that, we all have our misfortunes along the way, our impediments that require us to go around or over or under or whatever it may be. But I was determined to get into entertainment law. And then over time, I have, to the best of my ability, figured out how to make my profession work. And I'm in a business where everything is changing all the time, the clients, the law, and to some degree the economics.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Now, what begins your fascination with John Wooden?
Okay, so in 1981 or 2, I was 34 years old, 32, 33, and I saw, and I had pretty much at that point achieved my biggest goal, and that was I represented the biggest group in the history of rock and roll. I was the lawyer for Yoko Ono right after the death of John Lennon, and that's pretty much all I was doing during that period. And I saw this thing called the Pyramid of Success on a friend's wall, and I said, who did that? That's interesting. And he said, John Wooden. And I said, the basketball coach? And he said, yeah. And so I ended up calling UCLA, and somebody gave me his phone number, and I called him up and I said, I'd like to come and talk to you about the pyramid. And he said, okay, come on out. And I went out with my friend and interviewed, talked to Coach about it, and then I called him up and said, I would like to interview you. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I had somewhat of a journalistic background from college. I'd been on the school paper, and I'd published one or two things for the LA Weekly, and I'd written some scholarly articles. Anyway, he said, okay, fine. So I went out and I interviewed him. Then I called him up and said, I want to do a book on you. And he said, no, my wife is ill. So I went and I did the first few chapters anyway, and I sent it to him, and it came back redlined a month later from him. And that's how I got into it. And then I just decided I'm going to write about this person the same way that I do a law case, which is as thoroughly as possible. And it took me, 15 or more years to finally to get it together. And I did 200 interviews, and I read thousands of newspaper and magazine articles, and went to the Basketball Hall of Fame in Massachusetts and visited his home in Martinsville, Indiana, and went to various libraries, and it was just a marvelous experience to do it. And it was all because he was such an interesting man. And I'm a fellow who really was not that interested in basketball, but wrote a book about everything you want to know about college basketball during that period of time. And it just goes to show how life can lead you in various ways that are ultimately become very interesting. And I guess fundamentally I did it because his philosophy makes complete rational sense.
And what philosophy is that?
That success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing you've made the effort to become your best. And then there are all these other ingredients that go into the pyramid that are part of the building blocks, like industriousness, in other words, and friendship and loyalty, cooperation, initiative, self-control, condition, skill, team spirit, poise, confidence, integrity, patience, reliability, honesty, sincerity, ambition, adaptability, resourcefulness, fight, faith, and intentness, meaning, set a realistic goal. And I think if that's one thing I want to get across to your listening audience, then is that any you can all achieve whatever goals you want as long as they are realistic. And I wanted to have a successful law practice in entertainment. I did it. I wanted to write a book about Coach Wooden. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, the thing I'm most proud of ever doing. I did it. And it was realistic. I wanted to make music and play with well-known musicians and hold my own. I was able to do it. I don't want to be one of those people that went through life and said, I wish I had blank. I'm saying we go around the planet, we go around so quickly, it can happen, and it can also happen amazingly fast. When I look at Snapchat, Facebook,
right,
Uber,
right,
all these instantaneous. I mean, it's like Uber's like 5 years old and is taking over the world. If you look at, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, he's like the richest person in the world now, and he started the darn company 25 years ago. And he started out of his garage with doing some books, and the next thing you know is he's delivering our groceries.
Yes, and he is literally taking over the world right there. It's kind of hard to avoid. It's like, how do you avoid Amazon in your daily life? I have no idea.
He's changed it all. And, look at what's going on. That's why it's a time for entrepreneurs, whatever it's going to be, because retail and malls in particular are really under the gun right now as to how they're going to continue to do it. And they say, a fourth of the malls are going to be out of business. Yeah, well, you know what? The other 3/4 of those malls, they're going to figure it out, I expect, and make them attractive places just like they were 25, 30 years ago.
Indeed. Now, speaking of entrepreneurs, the talent that you guys end up representing, and they're entrepreneurs just of a different sort. Would you agree?
One of the most exciting and yet at the same time challenging professions is to be an entertainer, whether you're a musician, an actor, a director, or working behind the scenes such as a producer. because there's no job security. And this is a business where in the acting world, maybe 10% of the people make a good living, and some of them are superstars, and the rest of them are working other jobs to make it happen. But and that's why that's when it comes into play. That set a realistic goal. You have to have the talent and the drive and the will and the experience to move up the ladder overall. But I have seen throughout my career musicians and actors, for example, who they have no other choice in their life. This is in their bones, their DNA. They have to go out and try and make it work. And I say to them, God bless, go for it. You probably can and will make it if you have that, or you'll figure out a way to make it work for you overall. Maybe you'll end up doing dinner theater, or playing in lesser venues, etc. But for example, I know a couple of musicians, I won't name who they are. They've made okay livings. They haven't had hits, or maybe they've had one or two hits along the way, but they love to play music, and they enjoy the travel and finding a new audience, and they're born to do it. So I say, great, yeah, for those who have chosen that life, yeah, you can make it, but it's maybe very difficult at times. You may be living on ramen.
Totally understood. So when it comes down to some of the quotes and sayings of John Wooden in the new book Woodenisms, what would you say if you were talking directly to young entrepreneurs just getting started? What would be like the top three that come off the top of your head that say, you know what, these three are probably going to mean the most to you guys right now, and here's how you can apply them? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, CashFlowDiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
Coach Wooden's most famous saying is, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So I say, whatever you're doing, if starting a business, running a business, is you have to know everything there is to know, or as best as you can, about that particular business or issue that you're going to face. So when I go to court, well, I'll tell you this. I did an interview show where I interviewed judges and lawyers some years ago, and I asked a very prominent federal judge, and these are heavy-duty judges because they're appointed for life in the federal court. I said, what's the most important thing for a lawyer? And he said, preparation. And I say that's the most important thing for a lawyer as well, is preparation. And I say that's the most important thing for everybody else. The other thing is to have a sort of a balanced approach to it all. And that means, look, your job is really important, whatever it may be, but you've got your physical well-being to take care of. You've got your emotional well-being, and you have your spiritual well-being. So do not miss the opportunities to be with family and loved ones and lovers, and to get the most out of every day. that leads me to the next one. One of Coach's favorite sayings is, make each day your masterpiece. And I have taken that to heart the more I get older and am aware of my mortality, is that, you never know when the Grim Reaper's going to arrive. And so we have to make sure that we don't miss out on all the good things that have happened and are going to happen. And we got to do our best each day in everything that we do, which means kindness and gentleness, which leads me to the third thing. He says, this is amazing to me. He says, the most important word in the English language is love, followed by balance. And you think to yourself, a basketball coach said that? Yeah, a basketball coach said that. And so that just goes to show you what it's all about. In other words, don't get so caught up in your life that you forget what life is all about. And I would commend another book right now that's just come out, which is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's book called Coach Wooden and Me. Kareem is the greatest basketball coach of all time. And he wrote a book basically saying all the things I'm saying, that Wooden was just like completely amazing as a person, and taught him so much. And so I think what I'm trying to say overall is that, look, you just got to do your best all the time, and don't give up. And Wooden also says, don't get really high after a victory and don't get down after a defeat. Just be non-emotional, play your game, and move forward.
Indeed. And does it surprise you at all that so many lessons can come from what could seem, so many lessons for business or entrepreneurs can come from what one could call an unlikely source? Yeah,
I mean, who would have thought that this fellow would turn out to be so important? In fact, he became more. First of all, let's just put him in perspective who he is. He won the national championship 10 out of 12 years. He won it 7 years in a row. He had 3 undefeated seasons. These are records that are not just unequaled, they are unapproachable. They are amazing overall. And at the same time, he was basically a quite humble fellow who was approachable by everyone and anyone, and the public loved him. Then he retires, and what happens? He becomes even more famous as a speaker on the circuit, and people want to hear what he had to say, and he just handled it all with equanimity. He was a nice guy. He was really, really, really a nice person. And I'll give you 2 stories from the first book I put out, which is called The John Wooden Pyramid of Success. His daughter said, we would have to go at the hotel, and he'd be talking to the parking attendant. And we said, Dad, come on. But he was engaged in a pleasant conversation, and he treated him with just the same respect as he would the President of the United States. Likewise, another time some pushy fan is sitting next to him at a basketball game when he's retired, and the daughter says, well, who was that guy who sat next to you and peppered you with questions? And he said, oh, just another friend whose name I don't know. And I love that about him, And I'll tell you one other thing about him, which is, to me, I think, extraordinary, is that he kept in touch with every single one of his players throughout their lives. So when I went back to Kentucky, where he had coached just out of college, they told me he came into the room and he knew all our names 50 years later. Mm-hmm. Likewise, the guys that sat on the bench, the guys who were the managers, he stayed in touch with all these guys and knew where almost every single one was, and was interested in how their lives had developed and turned out. And so he went from disciplinarian, authority figure, teacher, after their graduation to friend and confidant. And I loved hearing that about him. He was the ultimate mentor.
Totally get that. I totally get that. Yet, what I found interesting about something that you've said is, you mentioned the term well-rounded, and you're describing him as well-rounded, and you yourself you do other things outside of what where your primary occupation is. And I think as entrepreneurs, many times we can fail to do that. What have been what are some of the things that you do outside of your primary occupation that you've had fun with? But more importantly, what have been the benefits that you would want to impart to another entrepreneur to say, make sure you make time for these other things that you do enjoy?
I said to a priest one time, I cannot work 7 days a week. And he says, well, you're not allowed to. It violates the 10 Commandments. I said, what are you talking about? He says, thou shalt respect the Sabbath. I said, I am so down with that commandment from now on. And I can only work so hard. And the rest of the time, I want to use my time valuably, if that's a word. I want it to be valuable. So I have always loved music, and I've been playing guitar for a long time. And a little more than 20 years ago, I started to record, and I have now put out a number of albums, which you can see some of my videos on YouTube. I go by the name of Trevor McShane, and I do that because I didn't want it to interfere with my law practice. And you can buy them on YouTube and stream them on Spotify, etc. And I'm very serious about getting my music out there. And likewise, around that same time that I started to record, you had to have material, and a friend said, you need to write original stuff. So I started to write it, and I found that it came very easy to write both tunes and lyrics as well. And so whenever I have a moment of downtime, I'm waiting in an airport, I'm standing in line somewhere, I will write lyrics or poetry. And so I've got thousands of pages that nobody's ever seen, but some pages I put out. And so last year I put out a book called What Took You So Long, which was about 160 love poems to my wife, which the Midwest Book Review said, if you buy one book of poetry, librarians, this is the book you should buy. And I really enjoyed doing that. And now, you'll get a kick out of this, I have 2 books in production. One is going to be a book of secret agent poems, in which I write about the secret agent and spy industry and private eyes to some degree, sometimes imagining I am one, or otherwise I get them out of the news. And then another one of cowboy poems, which I don't know how and why necessarily I started doing that, but I get a kick out of doing it, and I have a certain degree of credibility because I am a member of what is called Cowboy Lawyers, and we ride, and we ride, and I will tell you this: the other lawyers, the cowboy lawyers, they're really good. They have horses, they have trailers, they know what they're doing. Me, I'm a greenhorn, but I love the whole deal. So my point is this: is that I have. And I travel, I read, I go to plays, and I have a very fulfilled life in that regard. Besides suing people, which I also must say I love to do because I have righteous cases.
Yeah, I get that, and I get that. What would you say have been the benefits of making sure that you made that time though to express yourself in those ways?
I'll tell you why. The first thing is, had I not found this hobby, playing music and all the rest of that, I could have easily become a substance abuser, I suppose, of some sort, and drank too much, something along those lines. Also, it's to create anything, whether it's pottery or to go out and work on a car, if you like that, or take up archery, whatever it is. It's fun to try and better yourself. As Coach Wooden says, you're never going to obtain perfection, but that's what you try for, So I am amazed that sometimes when I sit down And where did this come from? This particular thought or melody or all the rest of it. You basically have to do it. I saw a great author speak one time, and she said, the most important thing, get in that chair and start typing. That's the advice. It's, in other words, don't talk about doing it.
Right.
Just do it, with apologies to the sporting goods company.
Totally understood. It's funny you said that, because we've had many people mention that phrase and that sporting goods company and not say what you just said there. So that was pretty good. With all of the time that you've been able to spend with Mr. Wooden and being able to collect the quotes and be able to ruminate and think about these things and take them deeply into your life and just internalize them, is there one that you've seen, maybe I guess the one that people keep making the most mistakes around, meaning like you've seen a lot of people make this mistake, and if they just had heard this quote, maybe they wouldn't have. Does any of them strike you like that?
I guess I like this one a lot. Okay. You may make mistakes, but you are not a failure until you start blaming someone else. In other words, everybody is going to make mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. But you've got to go out there and make the mistakes in the first place. And so I think that's it in a nutshell for me, is that appreciating. Look, there's not a profession or person who doesn't make a mistake. It just happens. And I don't care if you're the best physician in the world. Sometimes that knife is going to slip out of your hand or whatever it may be, or make the wrong cut. It just happens overall. So you take that into account. And, here's the other thing. I asked him one time, what do you do when you've made a big mistake? And I thought this was very, very intelligent. He says, as quickly as possible, try and rectify it. So do not sweep it under the rug, move on it, and you know what happens a lot of time? It goes away. And I know that has happened in my practice when I've made a mistake, is I've said, what do I got to do to figure it out? And you know what? It turned out fine. So
right.
That's my best thought on that.
No, totally get it. I totally get it. And so for those that have listened this far and have been thinking of like, I probably could use, because one of the things I like collecting quotes anyway, but they're probably thinking, you know what, another book of quotes could totally be the very thing that they need. Or if they want to just find out more about what you are doing over there at Johnson & Johnson, etc., what's going to be the best way for them to track you down, or even maybe hear a little bit of the music I hear you got going on?
All right, so you can go to Neville Johnson on Amazon and buy my books about Wooden, the John Wooden Pyramid of Success, second edition, or Woodenisms, which is a book of the quotes. Or you can go on YouTube and look up Trevor McShane, and you'll hear some of my music. And for Johnson & Johnson, Google us, Johnson & Johnson LLP, lawyers, Beverly Hills, entertainment lawyers, and you'll get to see my picture and that of the others who work here, and learn a little bit about our business.
Awesome. Now, as we wind down, I got a final question for you, because I'm kind of curious to hear what your answer is going to be. So let's pretend for a moment that someone listening is going to, they're going to take that chance. They're going to make that leap. They're really going to go and become that entrepreneur. They're going to start out now and make that happen. Now, what tends to happen, though, is that when we have those moments of decision, we're often faced with a companion, and that companion comes in the form of a voice, and it often reminds us of what we can't do, how it's not going to work, and who are you to think you're going to write a book of poetry or sing songs and do all these other things. And for some people, they're even related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend they're actually going to follow through and do exactly what you suggest, sir. And they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
I would suggest that they immediately go on Google and download the Pyramid of Success and study it and figure out, am I living up as best I can to the principles of this philosophy, which is basically how to lead a well-rounded existence and how to make any experience work. And I think the second thing I would say, and that we haven't really talked about so much, is how important teamwork is overall. And that's why Wooden was so successful, because he had his teams operating as real teams overall. And he once said, it's not necessarily the best players, it's the best players who work with each other. And he had the best coaching staff around him, with the assistant coach and the guy who was the athletic director and the person who was the responsible for the physical shape of the fellows, the trainer. So that's what I'd be looking for. I'd look at the Pyramid of Success and I'd say, and have I got the right team? And then I'd just go for it. Undaunted.
I like it. Well, I definitely want to say I appreciate you bringing a different perspective and being able to look outside your primary industry to find inspiration for where you currently are, and bringing that to us and collecting the quotes and studying deeply the things that make success happen, and sharing that with the world, as well as sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diary, sir.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to Amazon, pick up the book, Woodenisms. Pick up the other book too, The Pyramid of Success. Why? Because you know you are after success and you've been looking for a way to make it happen. And who better to study than a guy who's, well, been quite successful in multiple areas. So now what's left is for you to imitate. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.